My tablet wanted to do a bunch of updates this morning, so I let it do it while I was getting dressed, and I just turned it on, and now it's updating everything. It's like, oh no. So, we are continuing our study in Ecclesiastes. We are in chapter 11. There's only one more lesson next week to go, and we will be finished with Ecclesiastes. Solomon has taken us on a journey these past 10 weeks that wasn't always cheery or uplifting. And that is why that I have ended each week with the spoiler alert to give us the ending and to leave us on an upbeat with each lesson. Because again, Solomon has really brought us down quite a bit. Now, I know you all hate it sometimes when you get the ending of a book or a movie, but again, I did not want to end you with doom and gloom, okay? And so that's the reason, and I'll do it again today, leave you on an upbeat. So Solomon, again, has really taken us to the bottom. He has written chapters on the doom and gloom and despair and woe is me. There is nothing to look forward to under the sun because we all die in the end. But for us as Christians, dying is our goal. Dying is the beginning. Dying is the beginning of everlasting life. And so death should not scare us. We should not despair about dying. But a lot of people do. And I've had Christians that I've talked to on their deathbed, and they were scared. But that is something that we as Christians should look forward to. If we as Christians live a true Christian life, again on the vertical plane that includes God every single day, then and only then do we find the true happiness, true and lasting happiness and peace. Solomon's tone is going to change just as his life has, as we get closer to God. And he lives a God-based life and not a life based on his wants and needs. Here in chapter 11, Solomon is going to tell us that God's plan for man is not what he wants us to suffer or be afraid or become depressed. God doesn't want us to be that way. God's plan for man is to be optimistic, to hope for the best, to think positive. To think positive and to rejoice in our lives as much as sinful and weak people possibly can do under the circumstances. God wants us to have a positive attitude. God will bless you and watch over you. He wants you to have a happy life. But remember, our life is short. Remember, I've used the example, if that wall over there is the beginning of time, that was creation. And this wall over here is the end of time, the second coming of Christ, when this earth will be done away with. And we draw a line from that wall to this wall, from the beginning to the end. Whenever that is, we have no idea when it's going to be. And we take a push pin and we just push it very lightly, just the tip of the pen into that line. That's our life. Maybe some of us have a longer life, so we can push it in a little bit deeper to make a bigger hole. But that is our life when we look at the whole expanse of time. It's not much, okay? And we think the world revolves around us and everything else, but in reality, that's all it is just that little prick. God wants us to have a happy life, but because life is short, and because we're sinful, and because we make mistakes, and because we make bad choices, because we are human, we don't always have a happy life, do we? It is because of our life choices, not God's choice. Look back to the children of Israel. God released them from the Egyptian slavery that they were under. And he gave them a promised land of land flowing with milk and honey. And they got there, but they didn't believe it. They didn't believe that this land was going to be them, that God was going to take away all these giants and everything. And so he sent them to the desert. For 40 years, till that generation of unbelievers died off. But that wasn't it, was it? When they did finally get back into this land that God had promised them, they still made mistakes. They believed in God, and then they'd fall away. And then they'd believe in God, and they'd fall away. And it just went on and on. They became into slavery again, but when other nations took them over. They warred against each other and split. So even God's chosen people do sin, and they did make mistakes. Okay. Yeah, I know. Oh, okay. Down arrow goes forward. That's what you said. Okay, that's backwards. We'll turn it around. Maybe that's how it's supposed to be. I don't know. Okay. Thank you. New technology. In chapter 11, Solomon again speaks in parables. These are short statements that have a profound meaning. Solomon urges people to adopt a positive lifestyle. This positive mindset, by resetting your attitude to include a new and a more positive way of living and thinking about things, this new positive mindset has 4 key attributes he shares with his readers. The first attribute is found here in verse 1. Instead of defense, think offense. Verse 1, cast your bread upon the waves, for you will find it many days after, or after many days. Now, this doesn't sound appealing to me. I do not like wet sandwiches or wet bread. I do not like any au jus sandwiches. I've tried it a couple of times. I just don't like beef-soaked water, bread I just don't like it. I like my bread fresh and not drenched like it's been out in the rain. Except for Italian bread that's dipped in olive oil with crushed pepper. That is good, okay? But just a soaked bread that's wet, no, it's not appealing to me. And that is totally different and delicious. Solomon is making a point of being on the offense instead of the defense. We can't spend every day of our life with our fist up in a defensive stand waiting for something to happen. That would be a miserable life. Instead, we need to put our bread on the water and let it go. We need to trust in God. We need to put everything out there. That God would send us where He needs us. We need to hold on when we make a prayer to God, saying, God, send me where you need us. Because He's going to. He's going to use you. I've shared with this before that Kathy and I, when we were in the Air Force, that was our prayer, that God would send us where we needed to go. And I had put in, I had pulled all the strings that I could. I had put in for an extended long to Alaska. I had called my boss that I'd had in Florida, had moved up there, and I had him go to try to get my orders approved and everything. But that's not where God needed us. God needed us on the other side of the world in Iceland. And so we went there for 2 years. And, you land on the ground and you say, okay, God, here I am. Use me for what? Well, as I've shared, the church, we had about 20 to 30 people. And in a year's time, they had all left. And it was just Kathy, myself, and our 3 girls, Joanne, and her 2 kids. That was the church. Okay? And there were times where I had to work on Sunday. And it was just Kathy and Joanne and the 5 kids. But a year later when we left, we had grown up to 75 people, and a man had moved there with his wife who was in charge of the commissary, and he was a retired minister, and so he took over my place. And so they had a full-time minister. And so when we look back at it, you can always see, 2020, and, in the hindsight, we see why God put us there. Because that's where He needed us. And when we do that, when we let go and we let God, when we put our bread in the water and just don't worry about it, as Solomon is saying here, God is going to use you. And you need to hold on, because that is exactly what he's going to do. More than often, what is going on this morning? We need to always be ready and be blessed by God, because more often it will be not a momentary reward like our earthly self wants. It might be just the satisfaction we get from doing the work of God. Verse 2, instead of hoarding, try giving. Give a serving to 7 and also to 8. For you do not know what evil, or some versions use misfortune, will be on the earth. It is better to help others than to think only of yourself. In helping others, you need to do it without thinking of what you are going to get in return. This scripture reminded me of Thanksgiving around my mother's house and around my mother's table. Growing up on the farm, we would usually have, I kid you not, 30 people for Thanksgiving. And it was most of it was family. Some family would come in from out of town, family that were local. But we'd also have people come from church who did not have any family. Dad would invite people. Mother would invite people. And we'd have 30 people. I mean, it was fantastic. My dad's idea, and he always told my mother, he said, when you cook dinner on a daily basis, you do not cook just enough food for the 3 of us. You cook enough food for other people. And we got married, and Kathy's would be in charge of setting the table, and her question to my mother every night was, how many do we expect tonight? Because we'd have people stop by, and friends or whatever on the farm needing work done, or asking questions, or church members or whatever, and they'd stop by, and we always had food enough for them. You know, that was my father's idea and plan, and it always paid off because there was always people, again, showing up for that. Solomon is telling us not to hoard ourselves to just our immediate family. We need to think of others all the time and give to others, not just of our money, but of our time as well. Going home Wednesday night when we had that huge snowstorm, I was trying to get down 27, and it was snowy and icy and everything. And there's one corner just before you get to the mercantile store that has closed down 27 so far in the storms that we've had because it was a solid sheet of ice. Well, this older gentleman had lost it. I don't know which direction he was going in, and had gone off into the ditch. And so I pulled over and back up to him and hooked to him, and took a couple of times, but I finally got him out. And people were just passing us. Didn't care, didn't want to stop and help. You know, that's not what God tells us to do. God tells us to help others, to give others of our time, of our money, of our services, and not to expect anything in return. You know, that's what we as Christians are to do. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Solomon is telling us to look out for others, to help others when we can, to give to others. We never know when we might need help ourselves. Paul tells us in Acts 20, verse 35, I have shown you in every way, by laboring like this, that you must support the weak. And remember the words of the Lord Jesus, that he said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. Now, don't look that scripture up for that quote, because you will not find it in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Well, when I looked up to try to find it, it sent me to the passage in John that we looked at when we talked about the miracles and the parables, that the scriptures do not carry everything that Jesus said or that Jesus did. It would take a huge library the size of the world to cover everything that Jesus said and did. So this specific quote is not in the Bible except for here, but we see that Jesus did make this statement. It is more blessed to give than to receive. We need to give not only of our money, but of our time and our affection. our service, and our talents, whatever. There's that word again. But we need to be willing to help others with whatever they need. We never know when the tables will turn, and we will be the one on the needy side. When we lived in North Carolina, we had a major ice storm, and when we lost our power for 4 days. And we stuck it out for 3 days, and we did everything that we could. We actually had some friends come over and stay with us during that time. We all stayed in the living room, hung up blankets to keep what little bit of heat we had in there. They left, and after 3 days, it just got too cold for the kids and everything. So a family from church opened up their house, and we went and stayed with them that fourth night. And we got our electricity back, and we went home and everything. But you need to be willing to do that for people, to help them whenever there is a need. You never know, like I said, when you will be the one on the needing side. How do we know that a friend or a Christian family member is in need? We listen. How do we listen? We talk to them. We talk to them on the phone, or today we could text them. The other side of that coin is we can't be stubborn and not tell others of our needs. We can't get help if we don't share. I have had people tell me that they were in need, but they left the church because nobody ever helped them. And I asked them, I said, who did you ask? What was your problem? They said, well, I didn't ask anybody. I didn't tell them we were that we needed help. And I said, well, then how was anybody supposed to help you if they didn't know that there was a need? And they said, well, I thought that everybody would know that we needed something. And it's like, well, how if you didn't share it? You see what I'm saying? People get mad if they don't get help, but they didn't tell anybody that they needed help. Why? Well, because sometimes we get embarrassed about that, and we don't want to share that we're in need. Okay? So it's a two-sided coin. We need to be willing to help, but we need to be willing to get help when we need it. By doing so, by helping others, you will find out what the first century Christians found out in the last few verses of Acts 2. What did they do? They sold what they had and they gave it to others that were in need. They met in each other's homes to eat and to socialize. That is what we today need to do. That is Christianity. We are not supposed to just help other Christians, but we are to help our friends and our neighbors. Do you understand the last part of this verse 35? It is more blessed to give than to receive. It is more blessed to give than to receive. Verses 3 and 4. Instead of watching, we need to try doing. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves upon the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or the north, in the place where that tree falls, there it will still be, or shall still lie. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. Solomon is stating natural facts that were true 3,000 years ago and still hold true today. Do they not? These are laws of nature, or just a natural order of nature that we have learned, and we build our lives around them. Do we not? You walk outside to go to work and you see dark clouds. You don't need a weatherman to tell you that it's going to rain. You go back inside and you grab an umbrella, if you still use those, okay? Because you know it's going to rain. About 5 or 6 years ago, I was hunting up north of Mount Spokane. And I was walking around this curvy road, and first time in my life I'd ever heard a tree fall without being cut down. And so I walked around this little hill, walked up on it, and sure enough, there was a tree that had just fallen down. Law of nature states if I go out there now and nobody has cut it up for firewood, that tree is still going to be laying there. That's what Solomon is saying here. Okay? That law of nature is still true. The farmer has learned to plant, fertilize, and sow his crops depending on the weather. A friend was telling me at the time that he was going to plant new grass, and he wanted to get rid of all of his grass, so he sprayed it with killed the weeds, killed the grass, killed everything. Well, he didn't look at the weather report. that night it rained really hard, and it washed all that kill into his neighbor's yard, who was a little bit lower than him. A couple of days later, the neighbor's yard all died, and his insurance had to pay to replace his neighbor's grass. Okay? Again, he didn't look at the weather. He didn't read the weather reports. He did what he wanted to do. Again, this is what Solomon is talking about, that we need to be careful and listen to what the nature is telling us. So we have the option to be just watchers and not learn anything about what is happening around us, or we can be watchers and doers. Learn about what is going on around us and learn to do the smart things from what we have learned and not be just stupid watchers. How much time and energy have you wasted on thinking and worrying about things that have happened in the past? Can you change what happened in the past? No. All we can do is waste time today thinking about and worrying about the events from our past. What does Jesus tell us in Matthew 6 about worrying? He tells us not to worry about anything. Don't worry about what you're going to eat or what you're going to drink or what you're going to wear. Jesus told us to look at the lilies in the field, how they grow. They are beautiful, but they did not do anything. God is the one who fertilized them and watered them and to make them grow. Solomon, in all of his glory, did not look like one of these. Do you notice how Jesus is turning this parable around on Solomon? Okay, I think that's very interesting. Solomon is telling us not to just sit there and watch the world go by. We need to get out of our easy chair and be doers. Verses 5 and 6. Instead of doubting, try trusting. As you do not know what is in the way of the wind, or how the bones grow in the womb of her who is with child, so you do not know the works of God who makes everything. In the morning sow your seed, and in the evening do not withhold your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, either this or that, or whether both alike will be good. Understand this one thing. We are stupid when it comes to the ways of God. Man, with all of his scientific knowledge, does not know how to explain the ways of God. They can't explain the knowledge of God. They are just finding out what God has stated centuries ago in the Bible. And why? God told the Israelites not to eat of unclean animals, any animal with a forked or cloven hoof, a split hoof. Okay? Why? In 1835, a scientist figured out that trichinosis was what was causing people to die by eating pork that wasn't totally cooked. 10 years later, Joseph Leidy, an American scientist, pinpointed that it came from the meat not being overly cooked. And it took another 20 years before scientists totally agreed on that prognosis and what he found. This was something that God told the Israelites centuries ago, not to eat the unclean meat. Why? Because when they're wandering around in the desert, they might not be able to find firewood to make a fire to cook it. They did not know what temperature you needed to bring a pork up to make it safe to eat. And they didn't have meat thermometers either to find out what that temperature was. So instead, God said, do not eat anything that is unclean. So they didn't get sick and die, because it wasn't going to be until 1835 that they figured out why. But yet God had told the Israelites thousands of years earlier. So scientists, there's no way that they can understand why God does what he does, when he does it, or anything. But God knows, and we just need to trust it and not doubt. In verse 6, Solomon is telling us to sow our seeds in the fields in the morning, but don't trust that. How many times does it not rain and the seeds don't germinate? Or the rain does come and it washes the seeds or the fields away? or it rains just before the harvest, or the temperature drops below freezing and the crop is lost. Solomon is telling us to not put all of our eggs in one basket, sort of. He is telling us to work with our hands at night, not to be lazy. Do something else to earn money just in case the crops that you planted do not produce. Do something else. Do this or that. Great if the harvest comes in and you make a living off the harvest, and you also make some money off of what you were doing with your hands. Then you have 2 nest eggs. Better to have that than to have nothing because you were lazy and trusted in the harvest alone. Be smart, not lazy and dumb. Solomon tells us that lasting joy and satisfaction is not tied or linked to what we have or what we do, because it is tied to our relationship with God. The kind of relationship with God will relate to the kind of joy and satisfaction you will have. If you only have a skin deep or superficial relationship with God, then your true joy and satisfaction will be superficial at best. You need to have a deeper, meaningful relationship with God to be able to enjoy and have a satisfactory life to its fullest. This reminded me of the tickets that we used to buy when we went to Disney World, and I think Disneyland were the same way. You bought a group of tickets, a packet of tickets, and they were marked A, B, C, D, and E. And if I remember correctly, you get like 5 A tickets, which were to the small things, maybe the train ride around the park, It's a Small World, whatever. But the E ticket was the newest ride and the most exciting ride. And so if you wanted to have more excitement in your trip, you had to spend more money. Okay? If you didn't, then you got to ride one ride, a good ride, and the rest of them were kiddie rides or less exciting rides. And bear with me, but that's what came to my mind when I was reading this. If we want to have a more exciting life, more joy and satisfaction, then we need to have a better relationship with God. Think about that for a minute. We need to have a better relationship, a more meaningful relationship with God for our joy and satisfaction. Again, we cannot be self-centered in our life and not be outward. Remember, this idea of our joy and satisfaction is tied to our relationship with God as we go over the last 4 verses. Verses 7 and 8. Truly, the light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to behold the sun. But if a man lives many years and rejoices in them all, yet let him remember the days of darkness, for they will be many. All that is coming is vanity. Light and sun are used to show God's love and protection. We read about that in Psalm 27, verse 1. So verse 7 is talking about God's love and protection for us is sweet and pleasant for the eyes, just like the sun is to us today with these cold temperatures and wind and snow. Yesterday morning, Kathy and I were sitting in a little sitting spot in the corner of the kitchen, and the first thing she wanted me to do was open the curtains so the sunlight and the warmth could come in. That is what it is when we look at these scriptures. That is what they're trying to tell us. These should remind us of God's love and protection of each and of us each and every day. It is hard to think of that on days that are gloomy and rainy because we do not see the sun. We do not get the warmth from it. But when the sky is totally blue or brown or black or whatever, blocking the sun, just remember that above those clouds, above that gloom, is the sun, shining bright in all of its glory with all of its warmth. And we need to remember that every single day when we're down. God is still there. God's love is still shining. It's up to us to look through the doom and gloom that's around us. But remember, God's love is always there for us. We must look through the darkness surrounding us and see the light that is always there. God's wonderful light. Verse 8, Solomon takes a dark trip, if you will, It doesn't matter how long a man or woman lives. It doesn't matter how much joy or satisfaction a person has through their life. We will always remember those dark days. And Solomon states there will be many. We have all made mistakes. We all have lost somebody close to us. We all have regrets from the past. But we cannot dwell on them. I have seen a lot of people as they get on in age will remember those dark days. Some have learned from those mistakes and did better in their lives. And others live in those past mistakes. Some try to recover and make good, while others will dwell on them. Solomon states that too is vanity. We can't change the past. We can only forgive others and move on. Verses 9 and 10. Take advantage of your blessings now. Verse 9. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. But know that for all this, God will bring you into judgment. Therefore, remove sorrow from your heart and put away evil from your flesh, for childhood and youth are vanity. Solomon is telling us, which is too late for most of us here, that we need to enjoy our young life. He talks about how to walk in the ways of our heart and in the sight of our eyes. But everything comes with a price. You can't go wild and try everything under the sun, can we? Solomon tells us to be careful in your youth. Why? Because we will all face the judgment. We will all have to give an account on Judgment Day for what we did in our youth. Remember, we are all looking at how our joy and satisfaction are tied to the relationship that we have with God. Verse 10, remove sorrow from your heart. Don't settle or dwell on the bad things in your life. Remember the good times. Celebrate the good times. Remember or remove the bad from your heart, because that will just bring you down. Remember, your joy and satisfaction comes from your relationship with God, not from your memories from your past. Put away all evil from your flesh. Again, we will be judged by the evil in our hearts. Our childhood and our youth, those crazy years, they too are all vanity. We need to take advantage of our blessings that God has given us today. So just real quick, looking at this chapter, we looked at the 4 attributes of a positive attitude. Instead of defense, think offense. Instead of hoarding, try giving. Give things to people. Help people, not just of your money, but of your time. Instead of watching, try doing. Don't watch everybody else do all the work of the Lord or the work of the church. Volunteer yourself and do it. And instead of doubting everything and everybody, everything that God says, try trusting it. Our joy and our satisfaction is tied to our relationship with God. If you're not having a joyful life, look at your relationship with God and take advantage of your blessings now. And of course, our weekly spoiler alert, which will be our last one in this study, Ecclesiastes 12:13. Let us hear the conclusion of this whole matter, of everything that this trip, that this story, this journey that Solomon has taken us on. We need to fear God and keep His commandments, for this is our all. To fear God and to keep His commandments. We need to have a good, working, loving relationship with God. And by doing that, we will have a joyful life. If there's any way that we can help you this morning, let us know. If you need prayers of the congregation, if you're having struggles, if you're having issues, let us know. Let us help you. This is what we as a Christian body, a Christian family, are here to do. If there's any way we can help you, please let us know as together we stand and sing.